Today's guest is someone that I was introduced to a couple of years ago. He has written two songs that are absolutely instrumental in my life. Proof, which I first heard back in 2024. I believe the second one is Through the Heartache, which was a solo song that he did. He's collaborated with one of my favorite Christian artists, Rare of Breed, on God Got Me Through. And he's collaborated with Dax, another artist that I thoroughly enjoy in God's Eyes. And so today's guest is Seth Addison. And so, Seth, man, I just want to thank you for your time and your willingness to sit down and have the conversation with me.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. I'm pumped to be here.
It's very rare that I actually get the opportunity to have a conversation with someone whose music and ministry and message has impacted me. You're the second person that I'm having this opportunity with. And so I'm just going to jump right in. And I want to ask, might be a loaded question, but the question is simply this: who is Seth Addison and how did he get to where you are today?
Oh man, that is a loaded question. I'm still trying to figure a lot of that out. That's yeah. So I just tell you a little bit about me, a little bit about my story, and that might shed some light on who I am. But
Okay.
yeah, so I'm Seth. I grew up in a great home, big family. I'm one of six kids. It's a Christian home, and we were part of a church growing up. And I've been in church pretty much my entire life and did all the things, played the music. I'm actually a drummer originally. So I was a drummer in church and did the whole singing and the whole church thing, learned the language, um, what to do, what not to do, how to look, how to present yourself. And I never experienced God like my entire life. I met some great friends and had really good experiences, but that was just something that we did growing up. It was just like a thing. We're part of the church. That's what we do. Um, and probably probably around 22, 23, I actually ended up leaving the church at that point because I was really just there to help friends out. Like if they needed help with ministry or with music, I just had no connection to God whatsoever. And I'm singing these songs I don't even really believe. And I ended up leaving the church for years because I was convinced that God wasn't real.
Mhm.
Um, and if he was just very distant. Like I just didn't have any relationship with him at all. And yeah, after that, I kind of I don't know if it was because I left church, but I just started pursuing things that the world said is like the blueprint of success and happiness. I couldn't find it in God or in church. So I started to try to do the checklist of, get a really good high paying job, make a lot of money, um, get a really pretty wife, have a couple kids, get a nice house, nice cars. I did all the things and I looked the part, but I was just absolutely dead inside. Like I had nothing. And the more that I got, the more I realized how empty I was. Because the bigger thing I got, the more that hole inside felt deep. And that led me to just some really dark times. Really struggled with just depression, just a darkness. I couldn't escape it. Um, and I started turning to different substances and alcohol and um, yeah, just really unhealthy friendships and being in the wrong place at the wrong time and just being okay with pretty much whatever my flesh wanted to do. And I ended up just absolutely destroying my life. I destroyed my marriage. I ripped my family apart,
Mhm.
um, lost everything. And this is probably 2021. I, I'm just driving to a client's house. And I have this moment. I'm in just a million miles away from God. I hadn't thought about God in probably 5 years at this point, like not even a thought. Um, and I'm just driving. on this bridge. I'll never forget it. And I just had this moment that I still to this day, it happened 5 years ago. I can't really explain it, but it was almost like God just grabbed me for like a
Mm.
split second. Uh, and I don't know exactly what that was, but all I could do is like pull over. I canceled my appointment that I had, and I was just broken. Like I
Mm.
broken down, but I felt the presence of God and this just overwhelming sense of love. And I had so much shame and I felt like such a failure. And it was just love that I'd never felt before. And the only thing I had leaving that was just this impression that I needed to seek God and find a church. And so I started, reading the Bible and all these stories that I knew or like I thought I knew, just kind of rediscovering those in the pursuit of God, and stories like Moses. I knew Moses as, great prophet, um, parting the seas, leading people out of Egypt. And but then I read and figured out that like no, he was actually like a murderer first, you
Yeah.
know, murderer and fugitive for 40 years. Uh, and I thought that was in a way, a weird way, cool because I can relate to that Moses. I cannot relate to, especially this time or at that time, I could not relate to Moses as prophet leader. I could relate to him as like exile, fugitive, living in the wilderness, murderer. And same things with so many stories in the Bible, like who I probably feel like I relate to the most is like Jacob,
Mm.
who is just I mean, it's hard to read the Bible and see Jacob any other way than just like a kind of a little shisty, like just lying,
Right.
conniving, and God is just faithful. And um, reading stories like Paul, where Paul is literally um, murdering Christians, and Jesus just meets him there. I always found it interesting reading through that. It was like God calls him his chosen instrument before he's like really changed. And he takes something that everybody else, including the disciples, after the fact, are like, "I think you made a mistake. This
Yeah.
can't be the God." Um, and I really started to like lean into that, and I think there's something really beautiful how there's not like a single perfect person that we see in the Bible, other than Jesus, obviously. But as far as like
Right.
other normal human beings, they're all flawed, all have issues, and that's something that I could relate to. Whereas, like growing up, we didn't really learn about that. It was like, no, this is the song and the dance. This is what you do. This is how you act. We're all trying to portray this image,
Mhm.
um, and I couldn't connect with that, but I could connect with the imperfection. And so I really started to lean in with God on that. Like I'll be honest about the things that I struggle with, the things that I've gone through. I won't whitewash it, no matter, even I mean that affects me present day. There are certain platforms I can't get on. There are certain organizations that will not work with me because it's not the brand. It doesn't fit the Christian enterprise. Um, what is uh, what you can monetize, um, as it is right now. That's going to change. Um, but yeah, and then taking that leap of faith because I just had that ingrained with me. Like I got to put on this facade, this mask. Stripping that away was like the scariest thing that I ever did. But then I realized that people were there, and if people didn't like me, it was okay. But when people did like me and they did connect with me, they were actually connecting with me, the person, not the facade that for decades I had dressed up in.
Mm.
And to see the impact that just a song can have on someone, um, has really, really motivated me to reach those people. you know? So I try to split my time between writing songs, you know, for God and frankly writing songs for people. Um, and that's where songs like Through the Heartache, Through the or Proof, it's another one where they're really songs for people. You know, it's
Yeah.
pointing to God, but it's really trying to reach the people that are not reached by the performance, the show, the act. You know, I love reading through Psalms and just watching. I mean, that is a uh, a lifestyle, breathing in, breathing out relationship with God. You know, in the highs, in the lows, and if it's in the Bible, and it's okay to show imperfections, like, well, I guess we can do it. So
Mhm.
that yeah, that brings us to the present day. So that's a little bit about me, who I am.
I appreciate everything that you said. I grew up in the church as well. My dad was a pastor. I know what it's like to people please. I know what it's like to perform. I know what it's like to for people to expect this sort of moral superiority. Growing up in the church, you see the good, the bad, the ugly. You see church politics. I know what it's like to see a church board and elders rise up against my dad as a senior pastor of the church, create a church split. I've seen hypocrisy. I've seen legalism. I've also been guilty of being the hypocrite. I've also been guilty of being the legalist. I've also been guilty of being the Pharisee. And it's interesting to hear your story because even though I grew up in the church, I grew up in a pastor's home, went to Bible college, I didn't have that intimate relationship with him like you talk about. I felt empty in a lot of ways. I felt dry. I felt desperate. I knew who he was intellectually, but I didn't know him experientially. I didn't know him personally. I didn't know him relationally. And it's so easy to put labels on people. You mentioned how you don't fit into certain molds, you don't fit into certain expectations. And I think that that's probably the biggest line that I love in your song. Uh, I think it's I Know My Name is the song that you did. And in that song, you speak about the labels and how people will place their labels on you and they expect you to adhere to those labels. But at the end of the day, it's not those labels that define you. It's not the labels that define me because you know your name. You know whose you are. You know who you are. Seth, I love the movie The Dark Knight with Tom Hardy and Christian Bale. It's one of my favorite
Yeah.
movies. But one of the things in the opening scenes of the movie is when the black mask comes off of Bane. And one of the things he said is that nobody cared who he was until he put the mask on. But in the
Mm.
church, it's something that's a little bit different. It's this reverse approach in the church where it's so easy to wear masks. It's so easy to pretend to be somebody. And like Jacob, Jacob was a man who I can identify with too because I know what it's like to pretend to be someone I'm not. I know what it's
Yeah.
like to pretend and dress myself up as Esau, dress myself up as who I think is going to get the favor and the blessing and the approval of God. All the while, all I'm doing is lying to myself. I'm lying to God. I'm lying to other people. I'm impressing nobody. I'm stroking my ego. I'm living in pride and arrogance, and I still struggle with it. I still fall short. It sounds so cliche to say that it's not about religion, it's about relationship. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are tired and burnt out on religion. And that's one of the things that you say in your bio is tearing down the walls of religion and repurposing those materials to build bridges. And I think that that's so incredibly important. I think that that's so profound because to your point, people today want it's almost like they want imperfections. They want real. They want authenticity. They want genuine. They don't want fake. And I think that's why social media, you can scroll on Instagram or TikTok and you find all of this content where people are literally just broadcasting their shame and their struggles and their guilt and their hurt and their pain because it meets people where they are. And I think that that's why I resonate with your song Proof so much because you talk about anxiety, you talk about depression, you talk about generational curses. And I actually want to ask a question about proof because, like I said, that was how I got introduced to you. It's how I got introduced to the work that God is doing in your life. And you talk about if you've never seen anxiety broken, if you've never seen anxiety healed, if you've never seen a generational curse broken, you have now. So, can you talk to me about that song? You said it was for people, but what does that song mean to you? And is there perhaps a line or two in that song that really is, I would say, is the greatest truth in your own life?
Mm. Yeah, so it's interesting that so the entire song is written past tense or like present tense.
Hmm.
Um, where if you haven't seen this happen, you have now, like it's done. I
Yeah.
wrote proof in a a low point for sure. Um, and it wasn't like a mountaintop, like this is how far God's got me. There are some things in the song that to this day, like there are some things in the song that God has brought me through for sure. But there are other things that I mentioned in the song that I still struggle with to this day. And
Mm,
so it's kind of part testimony. The whole song isn't a testimony though. It's like part testimony, but in real time. And the other side is like a prophetic declaration over what I'm believing God to
mm,
do in my life through faith. Um, and so that was the tension of the song. Whereas like I can stand in gratitude for certain things. Um, like anxiety, for example. I don't really have anxiety anymore. I used to have anxiety, like it was crippling. And it wasn't a situation where God just took the anxiety. Like I had this identity issue. It stems back from like the church where you just lie about everything. I
mhm,
lied. I for decades, I didn't think people would accept me. And I would lie about literally everything. Like, no
mhm,
exaggerate, everything. Even the little like meaningless stuff. I would lie. And it came with just like such a weight and a stress and a, like this tension of like just stuck behind this thing that I can't tear off. And I so badly want to take the mask off. I just can't do it. And
mm,
that created such anxiety. And God didn't really like take away the anxiety. I just spent time with him and I started to lie less. And then I started to
mm,
practice like, well, like I want to lie in this situation, but let's practice truth and like the little things. And then I would tell
mm,
like a big truth and it wouldn't shock people, or it would
mm,
be met with like grace and compassion. Whereas, growing up, if you step out of line and you don't look the part, like you are shamed into like, no, this is how we are going to look. And that was freedom. And I know like Bible verses in knowledge sometimes, but they don't really mean anything until you experience it and then they actually like come to life for you. So like when the Bible talks about there is like freedom in truth. And I realized that like that was my biggest chain like tied around my neck was
mm,
just lies. And I was able
yeah,
to just start telling the truth and there was such freedom in that. And then you realize like when you tell the truth, it's disarming to other people. And then they're like, "Oh, this is a safe environment. I can actually tell the truth." So like we do small groups at church and they're called freedom groups. And we lead with like just the unadulterated, ugly truth of like, hey, this is where I am right now, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I did last weekend. This is and you see these grown men, I'm just in a men's group, so but you see these grown men, like football players, big guys, just break down and just finally be able to like lay this weight down and take these walls um, and break them away. And free like what I learned through experience was freedom begets freedom. Um, and I think where we get it wrong in the church so much is like we're in this like ivory tower. It's like you come to us and we want to have people be honest with us. Um I don't say church as a building, I say church as like the body of believers. I think where we get it wrong is we try to get people to come in the light to us and but we still have our walls up. And what I've found experientially in just like talking with people and then through music is, man, if we can like lead with the truth and just honesty and are willing, like that's actual courage and bravery is to not try and put on the mask and facade and show up in your weakness. Like there's really strength in there. Um and that's freedom. And so like getting back to proof, I wanted to like inject that into the song and just be real with people about where I'm at. Like I still struggle with addiction. I still struggle with depression. I was talking to my wife last night. Um, I sometimes I just have these fog. I mean, I'm in a deep, deep depression, and I just can't get out. And I know the prescription is just to spend more time with God, and I know there's going to be something that I don't think relate is related, but is probably related. Might be like identity or something, and He's going to work that out and at like a root level. Because we want to, as Christians, focus on the bad fruit, but it's like no, Jesus doesn't do that. He focuses on the root, and I know
Yeah.
that will um, materialize and manifest in those things being broken. Um, but they're real, and it's okay for them to be real, and it's okay to say that they're real, and it's like
Mm.
saying things like this is why I'm not allowed on certain platforms, but sometimes I'm in a deep depression and I pray and I can't get it to go, and I will have a drink or I will have something. I mean, that's just me being honest, and God doesn't love me less for it. It's not, the Bible talks about slavery in, like, when it talks about being a good servant or a good slave, it's obeying your master. It's not fighting with them. It's honoring it. And so when Paul says like we're no longer slaves to sin, it doesn't mean that we're not going to struggle with it. It means the very fact that you are struggling with it and the very fact that you are fighting against it means you are not its slave. It means you're standing in defiance of something and you're actually fighting a battle, um, which makes God our master. And that's just a reality that we don't talk about because we're not allowed to. But it needs to be talked about because everybody struggles with the same kinds of things. Um, so I was pretty long winded, but that's just the tension that I wanted to get in proof of like, yeah, there are a lot of things God's done for me. I haven't physically stopped doing anything myself or physically got myself like God's got me through. Shout out to Rev Breed. But there are still things that like I haven't yet been delivered from. So, and I think that is where people can connect with it and find hope and faith and like gratitude in what God has done, but faith for what he hasn't yet completed.
I think that tension that you speak of, it's so powerful because can we handle the gratitude that we have for what God has done, but also the expectation for what he has yet to do in our lives? And you mentioned Paul, and I think this was something that even Paul struggled with because he said, the things that I want to do, I don't do. And the things that I don't want to do, I do. And that he was writing to the Roman church, which is probably one of the greatest theological books that has ever been written. But then he goes and writes to the Philippians and he says, I haven't arrived, I haven't obtained, I haven't already been made perfect. But there is one thing that I do do. I'm forgetting those things which are behind. And he pressed forward. And I think that's the tension that you speak of, is even Paul wrestled with it. You talked about lies. And I think for me personally, my 2 biggest struggles have always been lies and lust. Those have been my 2 things. I never struggled with drug addiction, I never struggled with alcoholism. there were times throughout my life when I would experiment with porn, and it was never an addiction that I had in my life. But I can tell you that there have been times in my life when I would say addicted to lying, because sometimes it's easier to lie than it is to tell the truth. And lust, it's easy to it's just easy, and you chase a high, and it's like this dopamine that you just continually you have to feed, and the more lies you tell, the more lies you have to take, and then you create this facade. And as you're speaking, I was reminded of something that Jim Carrey said. And I recently saw it probably a handful of times on Instagram, and he said, "Depression is what we experience when we don't wanna be the character we've been playing anymore." And that hit
Mm,
me. Like, depression is what we experience when we're done playing the character that we thought we had to play. And I thought about it, Seth, and I'm like, "What character have I been playing?" Like, really, at the core of who I am, with all the religious knowledge that I have, with all the Christian background that I have, Christianese, like, I would ask 2 questions: what character have I been playing, and who am I really serving? Who am I really pleasing? Like, even in this, launching this podcast and having these conversations, what am I like, who am I seeking to glorify? Who am I seeking to honor? And one of the hardest things for me to do, and I have no shame in admitting this, and my wife is one that has challenged this over and over again in our relationship. One thing that does not come very easily is something you spoke so highly of, and that's just telling the truth. And not only telling the truth, but speaking the truth in love. I think that was a more recent reel that you had on your page. I don't know if it was in response to a comment that someone made about Jelly Roll and speaking the truth in love. I don't remember exactly what it was, but truth doesn't always come easy for me. Sometimes it's easier to just lie, because I feel like there's safety in lying. There's this sort of protection in lying. There's this armor in lying. I'm 42 years old, and I'm literally, this is the first time in my life when I've ever just openly admitted this, that, you know what? That's been something that I've struggled with. And I think that that's something that I don't want to blame the church for it. I don't want to blame my dad as a pastor. I don't want to blame religion. I don't want to blame any of that, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for my own actions. I'm responsible for my own behaviors.
for
But
sure.
I think for so many years, there's my life has been steeped with lies. We know Jesus said the enemy, he's the father of all lies, but I recently have been challenged by this. The greatest lies that you or I will ever tell anyone in the course of our lives are the lies that we tell ourselves. And that's tough, because I tell myself a lot of lies. And you spoke of shame earlier. I will tell myself lies around shame. I will tell myself lies around guilt. And I think one of the biggest lies that I have told myself is people will not accept you when the mask finally comes off. When people are finally able to see who you are and it doesn't fit in their labels, like you mentioned, I I'm known by a name. It's something that is very difficult for me to do. It's something that I am really focusing in on with myself, is just what God has called us to. And for those of you that, well, you may not see this, I may edit that out, but there was a brief commercial break, so forgive us for that intermission. But what I was saying is that there were a lot of lies that I told myself, because I thought by lying I would be accepted. By lying I would be received. And I think that there is, and you know what one generation does in moderation, another generation is going to do in excess. And I think that that's one of the things. I love the photobomb right now. That is awesome.
No respect. No respect.
None whatsoever. But you know what though? That adds to the authenticity of the conversation. So I love that. That is the first time I've ever had that in any of these conversations, but I appreciate it because just lends to it.
He
But
doesn't care.
I really appreciate what you're saying because, I want to kind of take this and build on it because you did a collaboration with Dax and you talk like I've never seen God's Eyes, but I've seen the Devil's. I don't even know all the lyrics, but the lies that the enemy has told us. So I've spoken about the lies that I could potentially tell myself, but here's maybe another loaded question, kind of building on God's Eyes. What have been the greatest lies that you feel the enemy has told you that have been maybe difficult for you to overcome?
Oh man, probably the biggest one that I still struggle with is it's too late. Like you're too
Mm,
far gone. You had your opportunity and
mm,
um you missed it.
mm,
God's kind of moved on. He's done with you. And I know that isn't true, but it's one of those things like you can know truth and knowledge, but sometimes reading a verse or it doesn't hit you. It doesn't um I don't know, it just doesn't affect your heart. So
mm,
like I know the verses and I know identity, and that's still something that I really struggle with. I was talking to a mentor last night about it. It's just identity and knowing who I am, whose I am. Um, but if you make a mistake or you do something and it doesn't work out, or you miss this opportunity, or you could be going for 2 3 months and feeling great, and then it's one little opportunity, or you hold resentment or you feel unforgiveness towards someone. It's a little foothold, and those voices come right back. And I just think that's part of the human condition, like the world that we live in. And so what I don't want to portray is hopelessness, because I there's hope for sure. But I think giving someone hope that I'm never going to have lies come, into my mind, or
mm,
question my identity. Like, to me, at least at this point, that would be giving false hope. I think the hope is, how they say, like, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what you have to do in the face of fear. Fear,
mm,
feeling all of that fear. It's the same thing. I think um, building up those scriptures, trying to replace those lies with truth constantly, renewing your mind and going to God. And what I've found for myself is like those lies that are so powerful. The longer I've gone without getting in the presence of God, the stronger those lies get.
mm,
If I spend 30 minutes in the presence of God, me in my closet worshiping, um, you come out and you're hot. There's like nothing can touch you. And that's something where even with my mentor last night is like building in disciplines of like throughout the day, just taking 10, 15, 20 minutes, regardless of what's going on, whether it's good or bad, just to like recenter around God and truth, and just getting into his presence. But definitely the identity piece. That's been the lie I've struggled with the most, for sure.
It's interesting that you speak of identity because that's probably been the biggest struggle that I've had. And I think I heard it said this way: if you wear a mask long enough, you're gonna forget who you are. And if you pretend long enough, you're going to lose your identity. And I think there's a lot of people, including myself, that have dealt with and struggled with an identity crisis. Again, I'm 42 years old, and I feel like you mentioned, is it too late? And at 42, almost 43 this year, that's been a question that I've asked myself: is it too late? Like, I joke with people when I talk about my first marriage, and I say I got married too young for all the wrong reasons and before I knew who I truly was. And I got married at 25. So it's a little bit later than a lot of other people that have the American dream and get married when they're still in college, and they have the 2.5 cars and the house with the white picket fence and the dog and the
Yeah.
pool and everything like that. And that's been one of the biggest questions that I've had to ask myself is, God, is it too late for me when I'm looking at myself? And to this day, there's still times I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, who am I? What do you do when you look at yourself in the mirror sometimes and you don't recognize the person that's staring back at you? Or you look at
Mhm.
yourself in the mirror and you're like, what have I become? What have I done? It's kind of like the only way that I can describe it is I'm a Star Wars fan, and at the end of the Revenge, I think it's the Return of the Sith or something. It's the third one in the prequel, and Anakin Skywalker goes on a rampage because he was influenced by the dark side, and he asks a very powerful question, and he says, "What have I done?" And it's at that point where I think he really surrendered himself to the dark side. He surrendered himself to a force that was different than what he had known. And, you mentioned Moses earlier, and Moses was a murderer, right? He was a murderer. He fled. He spent 40 years on the backside of the desert. But dude was 80 years old when God called him. And he spent 40 years leading a bunch of unbelieving, complaining people through a desert. And I would imagine I was having this conversation with a really good friend of mine a couple weeks ago, and seems to specialize in the lives of those people who feel like their time has passed, if that makes sense. God, how can you use me right now? I was a pastor at one point. I got out of the ministry. I haven't served in the church in a while, and I'm at a point right now where I'm really understanding this concept of identity. And I think it's interesting because I think that, like, that's even what the devil tried to do with Jesus in the wilderness. If you are the son of God, he legit heard the voice of his father speak from heaven saying, "This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased." He heard the voice of God. And yet the very first thing that the enemy did when he was in the wilderness, when he was in his most vulnerable places, question that identity. If you are, and I think if we don't, one of the things that I've been guilty of is the temptation that Jesus has. If you don't know your identity, it's very easy to give yourself over to the temptations of the devil and do things you were never authorized or called to do. Jesus, if he didn't understand his identity, he could have turned those stones into bread, but he didn't. He resisted the temptation. And I think that's what a lot of people do is if you don't know whose you are, and if you don't know who you are, you're probably not only going to chase the wrong things, but you're going to find yourself trying to do things that you don't have the authority or approval to do. And then you're going to wake up one morning and you're going to ask how, and I'm just going to say it this way because I don't know any other way to say it. How the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
How the hell did I drift so far? If you I would liken it this way, it's called the law of 1 and 60. It's aviation and nautical. And if you deviate 1 degree, either flying a plane or navigating a boat, and if you consistently navigate 1 degree every minute on the minute, eventually you're going to be so off course from where you were originally headed. And I think for me, I allowed myself to drift, which is crazy to say, Seth, because we grew up in the church, right?
Yeah.
And then it's very easy to allow ourselves to drift spiritually and emotionally and mentally and physically. And then I'm grateful, and you mentioned this, I'm grateful that God, no matter how many times I find myself in a pig pen, eating the same things that the pigs ate, no matter how many times I find myself in that place spiritually or mentally, I'm still able to come home. I'm still able to return to the Father. And when he sees me a long way off, he doesn't wait for me to come to him. He doesn't wait for me. And I love that about the prodigal son, Seth. He didn't wait. He didn't. clean him up before he accepted him. I've heard it said this way: Jesus didn't call us to clean the fish; he called us to catch the fish. And I think
Mm,
that that's to your point about tearing down the walls of religion and repurposing it. Is I think so many times we feel it's our obligation to clean the fish. And Jesus never said, Jesus says, I will make you fishers of men. But he didn't tell the disciples that they were responsible for cleaning them and sanctifying them and purifying them. That was never their assignment. That was never their mission. And so I want to just continue with that topic of, because I think it's powerful what you say about the walls that we build, the walls that religion builds in church that keeps people out, but also makes a lot of churches feel more like prisons and cemeteries than they are home and hospital for the broken and for the hurting. And so I guess my question to you is regarding walls, and what walls you feel churches have really put up that, in your estimation, because you speak a lot about this in your videos on Instagram, and I love it. I love that you don't fit into these labels that people in the church would welcome or embrace. And I love that. But what walls would you say absolutely need to come down in the church in order for the church to actually be what Jesus originally intended it to be?
oh man, that is a loaded question. Could be in a lot of trouble. You know, it's interesting. I think, especially in Western Christianity, like we don't. It wasn't until I started studying like Jewish culture and the Torah and Tanakh, and from a Jewish perspective, very quickly realized that like I don't know how to read. Like I'm Western, and it wasn't written to me. You know, our language, how we think, is nothing like how they thought. And
Mhm,
our Amazon Prime, very Roman-esque. It's why like Mark is written to Romans, and it's like this happened, then immediately this happened, then immediately this. It's like action based. It's like Hollywood. Whereas like when things are written in Jewish culture, they like take their time. They it's called like chew on the cud. They like to really process. They hide things. They want you to go and search. Um, and what I found in like Western church, we preach and we teach and we operate in a way that Jesus didn't, and we think he
mhm,
did because that's how we read it, but it's not. And we preach this form of holiness, which is just not biblical. Like we think
mhm,
there was a sermon at a church we go to a couple weeks ago, and they're talking about holiness, and there's some points that were right, but it's like we think God is holy because he doesn't sin.
mhm.
Like that's not what
Yeah.
makes God holy. When he says, "Be holy as I am holy," he's not saying live the rest of your life and don't sin. Like that's
Mm,
not what he's saying. So in Exodus, he's breaking down there's different cultures and they're all worshiping like different gods, and they just came out of Egypt. And so, you bring Egypt with you into the wilderness, and God is explaining to them who he is and why he is going to be their God, and they're going to be his people or his bride. And he says, these are all of the gods that you worship now or were worshiped in Egypt. And here is how I'm different. Here is how I'm holy. And that's the verse where he talks about, like, I am full of mercy, abounding in love, um, to I think the thousandth generation or something like that. I forget the
mhm,
exact verse. Let me plug it into chat real quick. Because I'd like to read this. All right. So it's Exodus 34:6, and it says, the Lord, so this is God, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. And that's God saying, this is how I am different. So holy means set apart. And what he's saying is, this is how I am different, how I am set apart from all of these other gods that you worship, or
mhm,
that were worshipped in Egypt. So, like the Bible says, Jesus King of Kings, Lord of Lords, God of gods. There are many gods that, are less powerful, but he's explaining why he is the greatest and what sets him apart. So when we're talking about holiness, it means setting ourselves apart. So when God says, set yourselves apart in the same way I set myself apart, he's saying, be compassionate, be gracious, be slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. That's not something that I've experienced a ton of in church. I've
Yeah.
experienced that when people come into church and they look the right way, or they look like they might be affluent or have influence. But if somebody comes in and they're dressed like a stripper, like, are we being the same way? Or are we saying, hey, you need to change first? Or if somebody comes in and they're cussing like a sailor, like, they're supposed to. They're supposed to. They just came from the boat. Like, they should be cussing like a sailor. And we reject these people. We push these people away. And, like I made that video about Jelly Roll. It's like, he's doing the things he's supposed to be doing. Like, he's a fresh Christian and he's walking on a path of sanctification. I'm sorry, I get passionate about this. It burns me up.
It's okay.
Uh, but yeah, like, he's doing the things he's supposed to be doing. And as a brother in Christ, like, Jesus himself is clear, is like, if you push away one of these little ones, and he's talking about young believers, if you push one of these little ones away who wants to believe in me, who's believing in me, it would be better on a day of judgment that you had a millstone tied around your neck and you were hurled into the sea. And I don't think we give enough credence to that. And those are the words of Jesus. And we will go and we
Yeah.
will quote Paul out of context because we don't understand the Bible, because again, we don't read or we don't care to understand who he's talking to and why in context. And we will treat Jesus as Savior, but then treat Paul as Lord. And that doesn't work. We interpret Paul through the words of Jesus, not Jesus through the words of Paul. So, like, when Jesus speaks, heaven and earth stop and we honor his words. And Jesus was abounding in love. He was kind, merciful to the Jew, to the Gentile. And God is obsessed throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New Testament, with the alien, orphan, widow, and needy. And those people are not the ones that come into a church or come into a religious setting and look the part and have it all together. But what I've found is, whether it be the church or like the Christian business or Christian enterprise, like, we are doing everything for the 99. And it's important to, like, foster the 99 and help them. But we're not doing anything for the one other than, like, hey,
Yeah.
this is how you become part of the 99, and you do it on your own and then you come into the light. So, like, when I see people who are like, no, this person isn't a Christian because they're doing this. It's like, okay, God, like, okay, Yahweh, who are you? Like, are we serious? Like that? I don't think there's a more dangerous thing that you could do, um, on earth, above earth, under earth, than, like, climb into God's seat and start playing that role. And I think where we're called to be merciful and compassionate and patience and love, and, like, we don't get to define love. The Bible defines it for us. And if we don't act that way and instead we judge people, and Jesus said, like, this is the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about, like, what will happen if you don't forgive someone or if you judge someone. And we just, like, brush that under the rug and then we'll quote Paul out of context again. And it's like, that doesn't work. So I think that's where the tearing down comes in, is like, all of these things are built on tradition and
Yeah.
money and monetization and man-made structures, and they're not built on love.
Um,
And I think those are the walls that need to come down. The church should be the most loving, the most merciful, the most gentle. This will get me in trouble. You can disagree with uh, LGBTQ. That's great. We should model that level of love and acceptance. Because when you accept someone, that does not mean that you condone all of their behavior. In Jewish culture, When you sit down and have a meal with someone, it is not just sitting down and having a meal like you and I would have a meal. It's a statement that you're making that like we are good. We are in one accord. That's why Jacob and his father-in-law, after they have that whole debacle with the stolen idols, they have a meal. And what that means in that culture is we are good. And this is tough to wrap your brain around. Jesus, when he's sitting and he's eating with tax collectors, he is saying, we are good. It's not condoning behavior, but it's saying, I am here and you are here, and we are
Mhm.
one. We are on the same page. I accept you. You accept me. That's the statement that you're making in that culture. We don't do that. It's almost impossible with our religious lens. Like, no, I can't accept that, or I can't accept them because they do this, they do this, they do this. And it, again, it comes back to identity. We are judging people based on what they do rather than who God says they are.
Mm.
Sorry, that was a really long rant. But I don't. There's nothing that's I'm more passionate about than that thing. Drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It drives me crazy too. As you're talking, we love to quote 1 Corinthians 13, the whole love chapter. And people love to do it. I grew up in the church and they love to quote it in the context of marriage. They love to use it at weddings. They love to use it in terms of husbands and wives. But yet we fail to realize that those words were written to a church that was gifted beyond measure. They excelled in all the spiritual gifts, but yet they were jacked up. They were divided. They were taking one another to court. They were allowing sexual immorality to take place in the church. They gave themselves over to what I would call celebrity culture. This person's of Peter. This person's of Paul. This person's of Apollos. This person's of Jesus. And so on paper, they looked good. On paper, they might have looked like this. They would have had the popping Instagram page and Facebook page and TikTok. They would have had all the followers. But you know what's interesting about that, as you mentioned the table, before Paul talks about the gifts, before Paul talks about love, he talks about the table and he talks about the Lord's Supper. And I think a lot of times we abuse the table and we sacrifice the table on the altar of our own giftedness. And we
Mm,
sacrifice our love on the altar of our own giftedness. And we fail to realize that what we're called to do, and I've been guilty of this. I've been guilty of boasting in whatever gifts I think I possess. I've been guilty of boasting of the knowledge that I think I have. I've been there. I know what it's like to get myself steeped in arrogance and pride and ego. Even to this day, I still wrestle with it. But as we bring this conversation to a close, I really feel that a lot of churches need to get themselves back to the table, and they need to get themselves back to love is patient, love is kind, like you quoted in one of your most recent reels in relation to Jelly Roll. And I love that Jelly Roll was featured on the cover of Men's Health because he experienced a physical transformation. And there's a part of me that wonders if that physical transformation that we see evident on the cover of Men's Health is not an external representation of something that's going on inside of himself. Same thing goes with Joe Rogan. People said the same thing about Joe Rogan, and he has one of the biggest podcasts on the planet, if not the biggest podcast. And all the conversation that was taking place around Joe Rogan when he had, I think it's Wes Bear, and he had Mel Gibson talking about the passion of the Christ and having all of these things. And Joe Rogan's going to church. Imagine a man with that type of a platform, if he gets saved and if he truly devotes his life to Christ, imagine the impact and the influence that he could have in our culture. Jelly Roll collaborating with Brandon Lake on Hard Fought Hallelujah. And I know you did your own rendition of that too. Um, but we're so quick to judge. And I think for me, to your point, you said, judge not lest you be judged. And it's interesting that in the same Sermon on the Mount that you referenced earlier, Jesus said, blessed are the merciful. But I think a lot of people forget what he said right after that. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. How can you expect to receive mercy from God if you cannot show mercy? How can you expect to be forgiven by your Father in heaven if you can't from your heart forgive someone else? And we get this screwed up all the time. And we sacrifice mercy, we sacrifice forgiveness on the altar of our judgments and on the altar of our criticisms and on the altar of our condemnation. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, and I've been there, that are nothing more than whitewashed tombs that are full of dead men's bones inside. And they say everything right with their lips. Their lips are near me, but their hearts are far from me. And I think as this conversation comes to a close, I think that there's an invitation to come back to the basics of life, come back to the basics of Christianity, come back to love. And he's inviting us. And I love that at the end of the parable of the prodigal, they killed the fatted calf. Like he did a meal, literally invited him to a table, to your point about fellowship. And I think that if there's one thing churches need to get back to, it's getting back to a place of the table where you can sit down. And I'm going to say this one other thing. Mephibosheth, weird name, but he was the son of Jonathan and David when he was king. He has, is there anybody from the house of Saul that I can show kindness to? And Mephibosheth was this one that experienced trauma when he was a kid. He was lame in both of his legs, and he shouldn't have received mercy from the king. And yet David invited him to the table and gave him a seat at the table where his own sons were. And that's the invitation that I feel like the Lord is giving today is come to the table, experience fellowship, experience love. Don't try and clean yourself off. Don't try and clean yourself up. That's my job. You're going to fail. You're going to fall. You're going to struggle. You're going to continue to deal with things. Holiness doesn't mean perfection. It means separation. And I think that's one of the greatest things that I love about that phrase, be ye holy as I am holy. Be separate, come out from among them and experience that new life. And so with that, Seth, I've enjoyed this conversation with you, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate your heart. I appreciate what God is doing in you. Um, and I would encourage anybody that if you're not familiar with the ministry that God has entrusted Seth with, I would encourage you look his albums up on Spotify, on Apple Music, on Amazon Music. Find him on Instagram, follow him, support what he's doing. And so, Seth, I tip my hat to you, and I respect you as a brother. I respect you as a man who I know is seeking to honor God with everything that you do.
Man, I really appreciate it. I gotta say really quick because I don't think I closed this loop.
Go ahead.
Or when I was talking about testimony before, again, it's just faithfulness to God. There are a lot of things that He hasn't brought me through yet, but like most recent miracle is like that marriage that I destroyed in my own hands. God has completely restored just over the last like 6 months,
Wow.
um, and that's all God. So it's like if you're not where you want to be in any area of your life, like just stay faithful. God will make things I could never have restored anything on my own. But family is fully restored, marriage is restored, and that is nothing but the grace of God. So um, find hope in that for sure.
I can summarize everything that you just said with one word. It is the title of the song that introduced me to you in the first place, and that is proof. And I think if I could give one more addendum, a word that is probably synonymous with proof is testimony. And that's a powerful testimony. And you are living proof that God still does miracles today. He restores marriages, He fixes homes, He restores families, He puts things that were once broken back together. And Jesus was a carpenter. And who better to know how to fix things and build things and put things back together than the carpenter who now sits at the right hand of the Father? And so, Seth, I want to thank you for
Right.
your time and thank you for, again, for having this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure, bro. Till next time. Appreciate it.
Till next.